I walked across the threshold of the manor house with a ghost in my pocket and a fire in my gut. 4 or 5 years. I had lived in the shadows of my own life, playing the part of the family failure. I'd worn the labels they gave me. The drifter, the disappointment, the cautionary tale. Like a heavy, itchy wool coat. But as I stepped onto that polished oak floor for the Vance family reunion, I knew the coat was about to come off. You need to understand the history, to understand the weight of that moment. My name is Silas. I'm 28 now. When the world fell apart, I was 23. My grandfather, Elias Vance, was the sun my universe orbited around. He was a man of iron and ink, a self-made titan who built construction empire from a single toolbox and a fierce sense of justice. My father, Barnaby, never inherited that grit. He was too busy chasing the prestige of the business. And my brother, Sterling, was his hand-picked successor, the golden child who could do no wrong. Elias and I were different. From the time I was 7 until the day he took his last breath, every Saturday was ours. We didn't go to country clubs. We went to salvage yards, timber mills, and the dusty corners of his old workshop. He taught me how to read a blueprint and how to read a man's character. He told me things he never told my grandmother, Clarice, or my parents. He spoke of a fail-safe he'd built into his legacy, a plan to ensure that the person who truly understood his values would be the one to carry the torch. When he died, the light went out. At the funeral dinner, Clarice read the will. It felt like a punch to the throat. I was left with a box of rusted calipers and a silver pocket watch. Sterling, on the other hand, was handed the keys to the riverfront estate, a property worth $500,000. My parents got a massive cash injection. My uncle Victor was given partial control of the commercial rentals, and Aunt Beatrice got the collection of restored classic European cars. I remember the silence in the room. I was 22, grieving and utterly confused. Elias had promised I'd be protected. But as everyone toasted to their new fortunes, I was left holding a handful of tools and a watch that had stopped ticking. The next 2 years were a masterclass in humiliation. 6 months after the funeral, my life hit a skid. My roommate vanished in the middle of the night, leaving me with a mountain of debt and an apartment I couldn't afford. I had to crawl back to my parents' house. That was when the narrative solidified. I wasn't just Silas anymore, I was the problem. At every Sunday dinner, I was the backdrop for Sterling's highlight reel. Sterling had made partner. Sterling was engaged to a senator's daughter. Sterling was buying a penthouse. And me? I was a guy working retail shifts, trying to finish an engineering degree online while my father asked me when I was going to get serious about life. I got evicted from my next place after a corporate downsizing. Back to the basement I went. My identity was erased. My mother, Estelle, would introduce me to her friends with a sigh. Silas is finding himself, she'd say, her voice dripping with artificial pity. Barnaby was worse. He'd make jokes at my expense in front of his business associates. This is Silas. He's going places. Mostly to the unemployment office. But hey, he's moving. They didn't see the midnight study sessions. They didn't see the 2 jobs I worked simultaneously to save every penny. They only saw what they wanted to see, a loser who proved that grandfather Elias had been wrong to favor me. By 26, I'd finally stabilized. I landed a mid-level analyst job, got a small studio, and began the process of cutting the cord. I stopped answering the group chats. I skipped the holiday galas. I went completely silent. And in that silence, I started digging. 3 weeks before Elias passed, he was in a hospice bed. The family would cycle through for 20-minute visits, checking their watches. I stayed for hours. One afternoon, he pulled me close. His voice was a rasp, but his mind was sharp as a razor. "Silas," he whispered, "Clarice doesn't know. None of them do. People change when they see a pile of gold. I've updated the documents. The real ones aren't in the safe. They're where the work gets done." He made me memorize a set of coordinates and a specific method of entry. He made me promise not to look until I was standing on my own 2 feet. He knew if I found it too early, they'd bully it away from me. 2 years ago, I finally went back. The old foundry on Blackwood Creek had been sold to Uncle Victor, but he'd let it rot. I still had the bypass code for perimeter gate. I walked into that cold, smelling of old iron space and went to primary workbench, the one Elias had used for 50 years. Underneath the steel plating, welded into frame itself, was a lead-line box. Inside was the truth. The will Clarice had read was a draft from 2012. The document in my hands was dated 14 days before his death. It was witnessed by his longtime doctor and a notary who had since moved out of state. It was a total inversion of the family's reality. I didn't rush to court. I didn't call them screaming. I spent a year with a powerhouse attorney named Helena Thorne. We verified every signature. We tracked down the retired notary in Arizona. We secured the original filing records from a law firm that had been absorbed by a conglomerate. I built a fortress of evidence while my family continued to post photos of their vacations funded by my inheritance. Then came the invite, a Vance family solidarity reunion at the main estate. I showed up at 6 p.m. I wasn't the disheveled kid they remembered. I was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Sterling's monthly car payment. I had the original will in my inner pocket and a digital recorder active in my lapel. Barnaby saw me first. He was holding a scotch, surrounded by his cronies. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The prodigal failure returns. Silas, I hope you didn't come for a loan. I actually have a pool going on how long it'll take you to ask for $50. The room erupted in laughter. It was a familiar, jagged sound. Estelle approached me with a smirk, holding her phone. Oh, Silas, look. The cousins made a meme of you from your eviction phase. They call it the Basement King. The kids love it. It's a riot. Uncle Victor cornered me near the bar. Heard you're working in a cubicle now, kid. Sad? You could work for me if you had a modicum of work ethic. Sterling shouted from across the room. Hey, Silas. If I call customer service, do I get your extension? Or are you still in training? I didn't flinch. I walked toward the center of the living room, where Clarice sat in her high-back velvet chair, like a queen on a throne. She looked at me with a cold, detached disdain. I updated my own will last month, Silas, she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. I wanted you to hear it from me. You've been removed entirely. We don't reward stagnation in this family. You need to understand your place. Barnaby chimed in. We took the family portrait an hour ago, son. We figured it was better to have one that actually looked successful for the gallery wall. You can grab a plate of leftovers in the kitchen if you're hungry. The room went back to its business. They had delivered their blows and expected me to retreat to the buffet line. Instead, I took a plate. I piled it with expensive shrimp and prime rib. I walked back to Clarice, stood directly in her line of sight, and smiled. I found the Blackwood box, Clarice, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a frequency that stopped the air. I found the real will, the one from the hospice, the one you tried to make sure stayed buried. The color didn't just leave her face. It seemed to evaporate. The glass in her hand trembled. For a few seconds, the room was a vacuum. Then the murmur started. I'll be in touch, I said. I turned around, plate in hand, and walked out the front door. The first wave hit 2 hours later. My phone became a vibrator on high speed. Clarice called 8 times. Then Barnaby. Then Victor. I didn't answer. I sat in my quiet apartment, eating my prime rib, and watched the voicemail stack up like cordwood. Silas, you're confused. Clarice's voice was strained in the first message. By the third, it was a hiss. That document is a forgery. You're playing a dangerous game, boy. 3 days later, Sterling showed up at my building. He couldn't get past the front desk, so he stood in the lobby, pacing like a caged animal. I watched him on the security feed. The golden child looked haggard. He knew that if the riverfront estate wasn't his fiancée's father, the senator, would pull his support. Next came Aunt Beatrice. She sent a long, flowery Facebook message about family healing and how the jokes were just our way of showing love. She said Clarice was devastated and wanted to clarify the misunderstanding. I didn't respond until Helena Thorne sent the formal notices. The strategy was simple: total lockdown. We filed a petition to probate the 2018 will and an emergency motion to freeze every asset associated with the Vance estate. When the letters arrived, the family unity shattered instantly. Here is the reality of the Vance inheritance. It wasn't just a few houses. It was a $2.1 million portfolio. Under the real will, the main estate, Clarice was granted life tenancy, meaning she could live there, but I owned the deed. She was essentially my tenant. The riverfront estate, Sterling's trophy home, it belonged to me 100%. The commercial rentals, Victor had 3 of the 4. The Real will gave me 3 and Victor 1. The cash, that $100K my parents received, it was a support trust. They were legally obligated to use it for my education and housing during my 20s. They had used it to buy Sterling's condo and Victor's roof repairs. Helena Thorne and I sat in her office as the responses poured in. They're turning on each other. Silas, Helena said, sliding a folder across the desk. Victor is claiming he didn't know the rentals were yours. He's blaming Clarice. Your father is trying to claim the support trust was a verbal gift, but we have the ledger. The most revealing moment came a week later. I agreed to meet Barnaby, not at the house, but at an old hardware store where Elias used to take me. We sat in his truck. It smelled like the cigars he smoked to look successful. Silas, he started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. You have to understand your grandmother. Elias, he loved you too much. It was an insult to her. She spent 40 years building that life with him, and in the end, he wanted to give the keys to a 22-year-old kid. She felt erased. She thought she was balancing the scales by using the old will. By making me a pariah? I asked. By watching me get evicted while you sat on $50,000 of my money? We thought it was for the best, he snapped. We thought if you hit rock bottom, you'd finally become a Vance. We were trying to help you in our own way. You were helping yourselves to my life. I replied, and Sterling? He's trying to sell the riverfront house, isn't he? Barnaby went pale. He's desperate, Silas. He's already leveraged the property for a business loan. If you take the deed, he's bankrupt. He'll lose everything. Is that what you want? To destroy your brother? He wasn't my brother when he was laughing at the Basement King memes. I said, he was a thief living in my house. I got out of the truck and walked away. Within 24 hours, Helena filed the injunction. Sterling's sale was blocked. The golden child was now a man with a massive debt and no collateral. The hearing was a cold affair. Judge Sarah Vance, no relation, though the irony was noted, was a woman who valued precision over sentiment. Clarice's legal team tried the dementia defense. They argued that Elias was of unsound mind when he signed the 2018 will. They brought in a paid expert to talk about hospice-induced delirium. Then, Helena Thorne called the witnesses. First, Elias's primary physician. Mr. Vance was more lucid than most of my healthy patients, he testified. He was calculating interest rates on his investments the morning he signed that document. Then, the retired notary. He appeared via video link. He knew exactly what he was doing, the old man said. He told me, I'm finally putting the right person in charge. He was smiling the whole time. But the killing blow was the certified mail receipt. Helena produced a document showing that Clarice had signed for a copy of the 2018 will 7 years ago. She had known. She had lied to the probate court. She had committed fraud. The judge's eyes turned into flint. She looked at Clarice and said, Mrs. Vance, perjury is a grave matter. This court is not a theater for your personal grievances. The judge ordered immediate mediation. She made it clear. If we didn't settle, she would issue a ruling that would likely include criminal referrals for fraud. We met in a glass-walled conference room downtown. Clarice, Barnaby, Estelle, Sterling, Victor, and Beatrice were on one side. Helena and I were on the other. The atmosphere was toxic. We can offer you $500,000, Victor said, his voice trembling. We pool our resources, you walk away, and we keep the properties as they are currently distributed. No, I said, Silas, be reasonable. Estelle cried, $500,000 is a fortune. You can start your own firm. You can be successful without hurting us. I already have a firm, I said, and I don't need 500,000. I need what Elias left me. I laid out my terms. Clarice, 90 days to vacate the manor. She could move into a high-end retirement community, funded by her own remaining savings, not the estate. Sterling, the riverfront estate deed transfers to me. He owes the estate for the fair market rent of the last 6 years, calculated at $120K. Victor, he returns 3 rental properties. He pays back the $140K in net income he pocketed. Parents, they return the $50K remaining from the trust and sign a formal apology. You're a monster, Sterling whispered. You're literally stripping us bare. I'm just asking for the receipts, Sterling. I said, you've been living on a subscription service you didn't pay for. The trial period is over. They fought for 6 hours. They cried. They screamed. They accused me of being Elias's revenge from the grave. But when Helena Thorne mentioned unjust enrichment and the possibility of a $400K retroactive rent claim, the resistance collapsed. They signed, every single one of them. The aftermath was a slow-motion demolition of the Vance family. Sterling's engagement ended 2 weeks later. When the riverfront house was gone, the senator decided Sterling wasn't the rising star he wanted for his daughter. Sterling moved into a 2-bedroom apartment and took a job at a firm where he was just another associate. Victor had to sell his own home to pay back the $140K in rental income. He's now living in the one rental property he was legally allowed to keep, fixing his own toilets because he can't afford a handyman. My parents stopped speaking to me. Barnaby took a consulting job to rebuild their retirement fund. Estelle spends her days telling anyone who will listen that I tricked the family, but nobody invites her to the high society brunches anymore. The Vance name doesn't carry the same weight when people know it was built on a lie. And then there's Clarice. I went to the manor on her final day. She was standing in the foyer, surrounded by boxes. She looked small, not fragile, but diminished. You think you won, she said, not looking at me. But you're just like him. You'd rather be right than be loved. You'll sit in this big house all by yourself, just like he did at the end. Elias wasn't alone because he was cruel, Clarice. I said, he was alone because he realized that the people he loved were only interested in what he could provide, not who he was. I'm not alone. I have the truth. And I have the work. She left in a car service I paid for. It's been 6 months since I moved into the manor. The first thing I did was rip out the velvet curtains and the heavy, oppressive furniture Clarice loved. I opened the windows. I let the light in. I've turned Elias's old workshop into my primary office. The calipers he left me, they're on my desk. They aren't rusted anymore. I spent a week cleaning them, oiling them, bringing them back to life. My phone still rings occasionally. Usually, it's a cousin looking for a handout or Aunt Beatrice trying to reconnect. I don't answer. The silence is my favorite part of the day. People call me ruthless. They say I destroyed a family. I disagree. The family was a hollow shell held together by stolen glue. I just let the air in, and the shell crumbled. Every morning, I walk out onto the porch and look at the land. I think about the Saturdays in the foundry. I think about the man who saw a 22-year-old kid in a basement and knew he was strong enough to wait 5 years for justice. I'm not the basement king anymore. I'm the man who finished the job. They say you can't choose your family. Maybe that's true, but you can certainly choose who gets to keep the keys. And as the sun sets over the Vance estate, I know the keys are exactly where they belong. The game is over. And for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving. I'm building.